Hey guys, this is Miss Harlequin, and in this video we're going to be doing a quick read aloud of an adapted version of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. So tomorrow in class we're going to read the original version. The original version was written by Edgar Allan Poe in 1843. Now because it was written so long ago, the English language was pretty different from the way that it is now. English is always evolving, and back in the 1800s, English was a lot more formal. Vocabulary was a lot more advanced, and that means that reading literature from that time period can be challenging, especially with our modern language and modern vocabularies. So it's the type of thing that needs a lot of hard work and close reading. Reading this easier version of the story, which was adapted for younger readers, is going to make reading the original tomorrow a lot easier. Alright, so The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True, I am nervous, very nervous. I had been and I still am. But why do you say that I am mad? I am not mad. The sickness has sharpened my senses, not hurt them. Listen to my story. See how calmly I can tell it. I am not a madman. I cannot say how the idea first entered my brain, but once I thought of it, it haunted me day and night. I loved the old man. He had never done me any wrong. I did not want his money. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes was pale blue and dull. It looked like the eye of a vulture. Whenever it looked at me, my blood ran cold. And so, very slowly, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, to rid myself forever of the eye. Now this is the point. You think I am mad? Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely and how carefully I went about my work. I was very kind to the old man the week before I killed him. Every night at about midnight I opened his door, gently, oh so gently. I stepped into the room. I had with me a lantern, but its light was out. I moved slowly, very slowly, so that I did not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour before I got to his bed. I could see him as he lay there sleeping. Ha! I ask you, would a madman have been as wise as this? Then carefully, oh so carefully, I turned on the lantern. I fixed it so that just one thin ray of light fell upon his vulture eye. This I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do my work, for it was not the old man who haunted me, but his evil eye. Every morning at daybreak, I went straight into his room. I spoke politely to him. I called him cheerfully by name. I asked him how he had passed the night. So you see, he could hardly suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in on him while he slept. On the 8th day, I was more careful than ever in opening the door. Never before that night had I felt so powerful, so wise. I could hardly hold myself back. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and that he didn't have the slightest idea of my plan. I almost laughed with delight. Perhaps he heard me, for he suddenly moved on the bed. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. The room was completely dark. The shades were down. I knew he could not see the opening of the door. I was inside now and about to turn on the lantern. I took one step. The floorboards creaked. Just then, the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. Meanwhile, I did not hear him lie down. He was sitting up in bed, listening. Soon, I heard a low groan. It was not the groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the groan of terror and fear. I know the sound well. Many a night just at midnight, when the whole world is asleep, such a groan has come screaming from my lips. So I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt. For a moment I pitied him, but in my heart I laughed. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first noise when he had turned in bed. His fears had been growing since then. He had been trying to pretend it was nothing. He had been saying to himself, "It is just the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. It is merely a cricket chirping." Yes, he was trying to pretend it was nothing, but this was in vain, all in vain, because death was approaching him, and the old man could feel it. I waited for a long time. I did not hear him lie down. Then I decided to turn on the lantern. Carefully, you cannot imagine how carefully, I let a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, fall upon his vulture eye. The eye was wide open. I grew furious as I gazed at it. I saw it clearly. Its dull blue color chilled me to my bones. I could see nothing else of the old man's face, for somehow I had shined the light straight on his eye. As I told you before, what you mistake for madness is the sharpness of my senses. Listen! Now I say I heard a low, dull, quick sound, the kind a watch makes when it is wrapped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It made me even more angry, the way the beating of a drum moves a soldier to action. But even so, I did nothing and kept silent. I hardly breathed. I held the lantern still, its rays upon the eye. Meanwhile, the terrible pounding of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every second. The old man's terror must have been awful. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you understand what I'm saying? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, in the dreadful silence of that old house, the pounding of the heart filled me with the most horrible terror. I was frozen with fear. For a few more minutes I did nothing. I stood still, but the beating grew louder, ever louder. I thought the heart would burst, and then a new fear seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I rushed across the room. He screamed once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor. I pressed a pillow over his face. I smiled to myself to find the deed so far done. For many minutes, I heard the heart beating with a muffled sound. This did not trouble me. However, it would not be heard through the wall. Finally, it stopped. The old man was dead. I removed the pillow and examined the corpse. Yes, he was dead, stone dead. I placed my hand on his heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulse. He was dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, listen to how well I hid his body. Then you will change your mind. It was growing late, and I worked quickly and in silence. I removed a number of boards from the floor of the room. I pushed the body into the empty space. Then I nailed back the boards. I did it so carefully, so cleverly, that no human eye, not even his, could have seen the difference. When I finished working, it was 4 o'clock. It was still as dark as midnight. As the bell struck the hour, I heard a knocking at the door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear now? There stood 3 policemen. A scream had been heard by a neighbor during the night. They had come to check. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I welcomed the gentleman. The scream, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man, I explained, had gone to the country. I bid them search well. Finally, I led them to his room. There were his things, safe and in place. I felt so completely sure of myself that I brought chairs into the room. I bid them sit here and rest for a while. I laughed to myself, and in the wild joy of my perfect triumph, I placed my own chair right above the very spot where the old man's corpse lay buried. The officers were satisfied. The way I spoke convinced them. I was calm and relaxed. They sat and we chatted. But before long, I felt myself getting pale, and I wished they would go. My head ached. I thought I heard a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more clear. It continued and grew louder. I spoke more and more to get rid of the feeling, but it would not go away. Then I realized that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew pale, but I spoke faster and with a louder voice. Still the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. The sound a watch makes when it is wrapped in cotton. I gasped for breath, but the officers didn't hear me. I began to shout, but the noise grew louder. Why didn't they go? I got up from my chair and I swung my arms about wildly. But the sound grew still louder. What could I do? I screamed. I yelled. I grabbed the chair I had been sitting on and banged it on the floor. But the noise continued and grew even louder. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted and smiled. Was it possible they didn't hear? No, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making fun of my horror. I could stand their smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, listen! There it is! I hear it, louder, 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 louder! Stop your smiling, I screamed. I admit the deed. Tear up the boards, here, over here. What you hear is the beating of his terrible heart.